Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to welcome you to ACP International's Salon Webinar Series, How to Build a Non-Traditional Career Path, Embracing Economic Disruption. ACP International is very pleased to provide you with this webinar today. I would like to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started with the webinar. All attendees are on mute. If you do have a question for the moderator or Ron, the presenter, please send it through the question section on your GoToWebinar dashboard. So I'd like to introduce our president, Heather Turnbull.
Thanks, Lane, and welcome, everyone. It's a particular pleasure to invite Ron Elsdon to be presenting to us today. As a longtime member of ACP International, he has I would describe a very elegant background that intersects private enterprise with a real contribution to our profession and service to those who have been involved in the college and community college university sectors, as well as a real commitment to youth and the development of careers. In addition to this being one of the introductory days to fall season, it's also the season for books, and it's particularly noteworthy to have Ron speak to us today at the introduction of his new book, How to Build a Non-Traditional Career Path. I love the subtext of this, which is embracing economic disruption. Certainly, wherever you're listening from today and whatever your experience has been personally with your practices or also with your clients, there's been nothing but economic disruption in our lives from 2008 and before, leading up to our experiences today in navigating a traditional, let alone a non-traditional career path. And that brings us to our topic today. What is traditional about careers anymore? Our speaker today, Ron Elsdon, as I mentioned, has a tremendous background in this particular area, and of note, his book, which the presentation will be based today, will be just an excellent guide on how we can support people who are close to us, family members, as well as our clients, in navigating this new space, particularly as we struggle with what's a career anyway and how we're defining it wherever we are in the world of work. So welcome, Ron. We're very much looking forward to your perspective today, and also to our interactive contribution from those who are participating live with us. We will remind you that we are audio taping this presentation today as part of our member benefit to our ACP International members. It will be available within 48 hours as an audio download from the Member Resources section of our website. So welcome, Ron, and we're very much looking forward to your presentation today.
Thanks so much, Heather. It's such a pleasure to be with the group. I really appreciate the invitation to deliver this webinar, and thanks so much, Lane, for all of your work in coordinating this and setting it up. It's a pleasure to be with the group today talking about this topic of how to build a non-traditional career path. We're going to look, in this session, we'll look at what a non-traditional career path means, why it matters, and how to move forward in this area. Now, the presentation is primarily structured for someone who may wish to consider a non-traditional career path for themselves. For example, this could include your clients with such an interest. While many ACPI members have already taken such a path, others may not have done. And I hope that for those of you already on this path, you'll find some additional helpful insights in the webinar. And for those to whom this is a new approach, I hope it will open some new possibilities for you. That's not to suggest, by the way, that this is a path for everyone, rather to offer it as an option to consider. It's been so rewarding for me for more than 10 years to be working in this way, and I hope some of that learning may be useful for you and your clients. Now, while a few aspects of the working environment that I'll mention refer to the US, most of what we'll cover transcends geographic boundaries. And today's webinar draws, as Heather mentioned, on some of the content from my recent book, How to Build a Non-Traditional Career Path, Embracing Economic Disruption, and it was just published last month by Prager. In covering this subject, we'll see how a non-traditional career path can form a strong foundation for career fulfillment, but it can also include practical aspects like supporting ourselves, which is kind of important as well. So here's the outline of what we'll cover. We'll talk a bit about the what and the why, look at the benefits and challenges. We'll touch on some of the strategic factors that are important here, and then on practical steps and the path forward. Let me start with a vignette. When we first came to the US, my wife and I was actually hired straight out of school in the UK. And I remember this is in the mid-70s, this is a while ago. We got on the plane in London with 2 suitcases, and we got off in Chicago. It was January in Chicago, and the plane landed, and we looked out the window of the plane, and lo and behold, we could see people walking around O'Hare Airport with face masks on. It was so cold. And we thought, uh-oh, if we made a mistake here. Well, it actually turned out well. Well, about 2 years later, I was actually working in research in the chemical industry at the time. About 2 years later, I found myself seconded to a chemical plant in Joliet, Illinois, which is also extremely cold. I found myself on occasion, say, at night, collecting samples from distillation towers and other equipment. You can picture it, wisps of steam floating around, extremely cold. Now, I just had to do this occasionally. The folks that worked at that plant had to get up every day and contend with that. It took resolute courage to do it, just as it did for those people working at O'Hare Airport. And the question you might ask is, well, why would people do that? And the conditions, there would be other aspects that made that attractive to them. At that time, some stability, compensation, and so on. But it may not have been their preferred choice if they had other options. So what we're going to look at today is how to create options for ourselves and for our clients, alternatives not defined by other people, but defined by ourselves. Which brings us to this question of what is a non-traditional career? Well, our definition for this conversation, we're defining it really just from 2 aspects. First of all, it's tailored to our individual needs, and it includes more than one source of earned income. It's what Charles Handy in the 1980s called or coined the term portfolio career for this. So let me give you an example. This is actually a published example. Someone called Rachel Nelkin created a non-traditional career that includes working part-time as a relationship manager for an arts council, half a day each week leading a youth music program, working freelance for music funding organizations, and running action and learning sessions. And she comments, it's not always a mellow existence, but it does make for an interesting one. It's taken me a while to feel like the sum of my working parts has made more than the whole. Relying on one organization to provide you with progression opportunities is unrealistic. You have to find your own instead. That's one example, and these are kind of connected elements. Now here's somebody with a very different approach. Peter Bates switched from 20 years as an investment banker to a combination, listen to this, a cabinet maker, a rare breed pig farmer, and a business advisor, going on to say, I'm more satisfied in my career than ever. It's been interesting to me that when I've given talks on this subject over the past few years, when I asked the question, what have you observed of the participants about your own participation in non-traditional careers, or folks that you know, how many people can rapidly come up with examples? And in fact, there was a study that came out last year that indicates that 40% of the US workforce, either currently or previously, has had some kind of non-traditional career component. And it's projected to get to 50% by 2020. And based on other information that I've seen about entrepreneurial activity, no reason to think that that number is any different in other countries. So this is something which actually is very active and apparent, but it may not be something we talk about a tremendous amount. It's happening, basically. It's happening. And the question, I think, is, well, the issue is there are structural shifts unfolding which are likely to cause this to be more significant in the future. So I have this evolving work environment, various things going on, economic disruption that, of course, we're very well aware of, high unemployment for those entering the workforce, and some significant difficulties for those trying to secure employment in a conventional sense, at later career stages. And so we see a tremendous increase in long-term unemployment in the US and in other countries. The availability of computing tools today, ubiquitous. It's a lot easier if you're in a small organization or an individual to stay current with computing tools than it is for a large organization which has huge switching costs. Now, one area that is specific to the US is healthcare. Canada, of course, has an excellent universal healthcare system, as do other developed countries. The US is still working towards that, and we're beginning now to see with the Affordable Care Act something that looks like a healthcare safety net that's beginning to unfold. So it makes it, for example, now in the US, people cannot be denied coverage for pre-existing conditions as a result of the Affordable Care Act. So it's starting to create a safety net now that makes it more possible to engage in non-traditional careers and also to obtain healthcare insurance in the US. That's not a barrier in other developed countries. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, so going down this particular route, or this non-traditional route, how fulfilling is it? Well, there are actually a lot of studies out there that show how fulfilling this is. Here's one example. This is an Australian study, a recent one. It's called the IPRO Index, stands for Independent Professional. And what you can see here, the reasons that people engage in this particular route or this path, variety of work, sense of freedom, perceived ability to earn more, and flexibility in terms of hours. But look at the satisfaction levels here. 87% generally satisfied with their work they do as an iPro, 82% very satisfied. Less than a quarter frequently think of ceasing that work. How very different that is from the engagement levels that we see in conventional employment. A recent Gallup study of more than 150,000 full and part-time workers found that only 30% of American workers were engaged. And that's similar, we see similar statistics elsewhere. So I think perhaps recognizing that large corporations are basically oligarchies with power concentrated in the hands of a few. They're not democracies. Here's a quote from Erie de Goose. The governance structure gives ample opportunity of large organizations to an almost medieval exercise of absolute power by management. It's no wonder that under these conditions, companies can become like fiefdoms for the few to be exploited like a machine. It's interesting, the exit interview work that we've done, we've conducted thousands of exit interviews over the years. What we find is that more than 70% of people left organizations due to dissatisfaction, not because something else looks better elsewhere. So in this context then, so having sort of talked about, framed the environment here, let's compare non-traditional and conventional careers. I'd like to introduce this with a quote. This is actually from somebody who is relatively early in her career development, an entrepreneur fairly early in the process. Here's her comment. This is recently. I can't imagine myself, this is New York Times, I can't imagine myself ever working for somebody else in a corporate setting, like a boss, or like being a minion. I think my soul would just die. Now the question again we have to ask is that symptomatic of some sort of structural shift, or is it simply one anecdote? I'm going to suggest there are some structural shifts going on here. It's interesting, when I first worked in what you would call conventional employment, it was in the organization I worked for, it was 10 years before I met a customer. Well, that would never happen in a non-traditional career, which is very much driven by customer relationships. The locus of control in a non-traditional career is very much internal rather than defined by somebody else externally. Work engagement we've looked at, levels of engagement tend to be much higher in non-traditional careers. And the breadth of skill set required is also broader in a non-traditional career. And it builds over time. It's almost like the difference between a conventional phone and a smartphone. Conventional phone is more like conventional employment, very focused on a particular thing, making phone calls. A smartphone does a much broader range of things, and same with a non-traditional career. It requires a broader skill set. There are obviously practical differences, compensation and so on. And outcomes and fulfillment, a non-traditional career path is validated internally rather than externally. So there's some of the differences. Oh, sorry about that. I just skipped a bit ahead here. Pardon me, I'm just coming back. So the balance then, basically I'm going to suggest the balance is gradually tilting in favor of a non-traditional career. What we see is the non-traditional career, high satisfaction levels, personal growth, alignment with personal interests and values. Whereas the conventional careers, stagnant wages, they basically have hardly moved over about 15 years, growing pay inequity where we see in the US at least CEOs earning several hundred times average pay levels, reduced long-term benefits, where we see, again, defined benefit plans essentially disappearing for defined benefit pension plans, and low levels of engagement. You know, it's interesting, the analogy I sometimes use here is, I'll ask a question, do you feel safer when driving a car rather than being driven? Most people will say, I feel much safer when driving the car, because we kind of know what we're doing and paying attention. And yet sometimes the perception is, in a career setting, that it's safer for somebody else to actually determine our career path, which is an odd situation. But I think if we sort of think back to other aspects of our life, it makes sense to recognize that, in fact, we can take control of this and by so doing can lower the risks and increase the rewards of it. One of the questions you might ask is, what sparks an interest in a non-traditional career? It can be longer-term gradual changes like economic disruption, pay inequity, technology-induced restructuring, or there can be rapid disruptions, job loss, initial entry into the workforce, later stage changes, those sorts of things. Okay. I'll just briefly mention my own non-traditional career. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. The reason that I'm going to do that is it's relevant to this group, and it also, I'll reference it in some of the strategic aspects. It has within it a number of pieces. Individual within it, a number of pieces. Individual counseling and coaching, workforce consulting, adjunct teaching, guiding and supporting a practice, volunteer work, and writing. All of these pieces tied together with that common connecting theme, the relationship of individuals, organizations, and community. Now, sometimes the question will be asked is, well, how did this unfold? Well, it evolved over time, from a base with business and volunteer experience to reaching a point in time where basically I was asking the question of myself, is all I want to do to make money for an organization? And in fact, that didn't look appealing for the second half of my own career. So I identified an area of interest, went back to school, took a master's in career development, started a practice. The first one was actually with my wife, which we still are active in. My wife works with high school students on the going to college process. I work with adults in career counseling and coaching. The first book opportunity surfaced at that time. An editor called me and said, look, she'd seen a paper that I'd written, said, how about writing a book? Would you be interested in doing it? And without really knowing what was involved, kind of naively said yes, and then understood what was involved, but it turned out well. And in fact, that same editor I still have worked with on this latest book 15 years later. Built some more organizational experience, worked for a non-profit, introduced teaching, then started an organizational practice, which at that point went full-time into this non-traditional path. That then grew over time. We incorporated, extended it, and along came the second, third, and fourth book. So that's kind of how this unfolded. It was an organic, evolutionary process. It would have been hard at the beginning when I was a chemical engineer and starting that to say, well, here's where this will end up. But it's been exciting and fulfilling. I'm so thankful to many people whose support has made this possible. One of the questions you might ask is, when can you start along this path? Here's a graphic that I came across fairly recently, which I think really captures it awfully well. The question that's posed is it too late to start? And the answer from these and many other examples is, it's never too late. It's never too late. So I'm going to suggest then that the sweet spot for a non-traditional career, the sweet spot, lies at the intersection of our passions and interests, of the skills that we can deliver, and external needs. And that in thinking about this particular path, whether for ourselves or our clients, to start to talk about each of these aspects and where they overlap and what that might mean. In a sense, this is vocation. In the words of Frederick Buechner, vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. And that's essentially what we're talking about here. Well, let's look for a minute at the benefits and the challenges. Benefits and the challenges. It's interesting, there was a study done of 25,000 people in 23 countries asking the question, would you prefer to be self-employed rather than unemployed? 51% said they would rather be self-employed. In the US, that number was actually 71%. So there's definitely a real yearning for this. But what about the benefits? What might be some of the benefits of a non-traditional career? These are some of the things that go with it. Autonomy, alignment with interests, contribution, the ability to make a contribution. It's financially attractive. It's interesting, somebody once said to me, if you look at the risk-reward profile, I was giving a talk on this and they said, 20 years ago, you might have looked at conventional positions and it would have been true to say they had relatively high reward and low risk. Well, today it's quite different. With this kind of portfolio that we're talking about, the risk is reduced because of the different elements, and the reward is substantial because there are not these enormous inequities in terms of compensation. Improved risk-reward profile, as I just mentioned, and personal meaning. Personal meaning very much goes along with it. So there's some of the benefits. Here's an example. This was actually a study in the UK that was done a number of years ago, asking the question of people who had engaged in this path, what have you found most rewarding about what they call an independent career? And the items that you'll see listed are very similar to those that were on a previous slide. Ability to control my own activities, to choose who I work with, seeing results, freedom from corporate politics, and variety and unpredictability. Some people really liking that. 65% of the people in this study said they were either very satisfied or satisfied with their success in establishing an independent career. Here's one quote. There's no way I'd go back to conventional corporate life, and I'm now 52 years old. I dearly wish that I had made the decision to work independently 10 years ago. Well, how about the challenges? And there are some challenges attached to this. Breadth of skills needed can certainly be an issue. And there are ways to mitigate that. Now computing tools that we have access to, for example, can provide wonderful resources in the accounting area. It's possible to partner to address skill needs if necessary. Launch time. It can take some time to get this established. We'll talk a little bit about balancing a portfolio in a few minutes here and what that looks like and how to mitigate that. Uncertainty. And again, by assembling different components, that can start to mitigate that piece. Access to benefits is definitely an issue. And again, we talked about some of the changes that are occurring here that can be helpful. And the fact that now the benefits that are being offered in large organizations, in many cases, can be readily accessed in an independent or non-traditional way. And now isolation. That also can be an issue. That can be mitigated, though, in a number of ways, by forming a team, by joining professional organizations just like this one and being active in those. So there are various steps that can be taken to address that. And my suggestion would be for those thinking about this to think about what areas might be of concern and what might be effective mitigating approaches that would work well to address those. Now here, the study that I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is the corollary, the challenges that people had faced. Difficulty finding suitable roles, uncertainty, the constant need to network, which by the way is true in a conventional career also. People who don't listen, I don't think that's limited only to this setting. And loneliness, that's the isolation factor. There's an interesting comment I actually found that somebody else made about reviewing non-traditional career paths. She says, let me suggest viewing input you receive, this is a quote now, through your own lens of discernment. And so here's the individual, Lauren Hargrave. She switched from a traditional career in finance to being a writer. Here's a comment. You'll always have people who tell you you can and people who tell you you can't. My advice, keep the cans on speed dial. I picked up the advice I needed, left the rest on the table, and moved on. Okay, so now let's take a look at some strategic factors. And there are 6 of them here. Whether or not to connect the components, balancing these components, finding differentiation, pace of entry, building needed skills, and partnering. The first 3 factors look at how to structure a non-traditional career. And the next three speak more to implementation. So let's take a look at these different factors. So whether or not to connect the components. Let me go back to the examples I cited earlier. Rachel Melkin, remember she was the person who created a career with connected components, the Arts Council, leading a youth music program, working freelance for music funding organizations. And here's a comment. I believe that each area of my work informs the other. Working with funders gives me a sense of the bigger picture, the national and regional context of my work, and examples of best practice to learn from. Working on the ground gives me real-life, credible experience to draw on when talking to clients or commenting on policy issues. Running action learning sessions develops my leadership skills. And so there's somebody connecting the pieces together, which is also true of my own non-traditional career. Now remember the other fellow, Peter Bates, who was the investment banker and switched to that combination of pig farmer and so on. His comment, none of the jobs I do relate to each other. I have no background in farming. It would be difficult to find another person with such an odd range of jobs. I enjoy greater security since I haven't placed all my eggs in the proverbial basket. So you can see the reason for citing these examples is they, in a sense, represent two of the polarities, one with a strong sense of connection and the other with the components disconnected. And there's no right or no wrong here. It's very much a matter of deciding what works well for you. The benefits of connecting, it can accelerate entry because of that common core knowledge set. It can certainly help with marketing clarity. There are infrastructure economies around content and communication. And value creation for customers. For example, I find that the work I do with individuals I can transfer into the organizational setting and vice versa. The drawbacks of connecting may be increased risk, and it also may limit scope somewhat, although quite frankly, the approach of linked components, while it may appear at first to be scope limiting, in practice it can offer a great deal of breadth and flexibility for scope engagement, according to personal preferences. There are different ways to connect components, different aspects that can be the anchors of connection. It can be content knowledge, specific knowledge, accounting, engineering, some skill set, biotechnology, nouns that describe content knowledge. It can be a skill connection, the verbs. Writing, for example, it could be applied in the form of technical writing, creative writing. It could be a customer connecting theme. You've probably had this experience yourself, but for me, on a number of occasions, I've started an engagement with a customer based on one particular activity, like exit interviewing, and then it has extended from that to other activities. Another example, leadership development into change management. Geography can be a core connecting component. In this particular case, I think we have to acknowledge that, or it's important to acknowledge, relationships are foundational to success in this area. And there are natural geographic connections, referral from one person to another, one organization to another, and from the point of view of customers. And then mutual influence means, well, one piece of a particular, one component of a non-traditional career directly influences another one. An example that might come to mind in our field would be somebody that creates an assessment, for example, that then might feed into other components. So a number of different connecting pieces. These are not mutually exclusive. They're basically complementary. They're complementary. Well, the second strategic factor we'll look at is balancing the components. Let me just cite sort of two examples of a potential set of components in this non-traditional career. One example would be a set of components which, each one of which can be secured very quickly, but the financial contribution is very small. Now in that case, what might happen is the whole portfolio could be started quickly, but it wouldn't be sustainable. It would never reach critical mass financially. Now another example at the other extreme might be very large projects that take a long while to secure. The problem there would be, while ultimately they could be tremendously valuable, you might never reach that point because of the time it takes to secure them. So what I'm suggesting here is that a combination of those two different aspects is much more powerful, more sustainable, with some activities that can be secured quickly with a smaller financial contribution, and others that take longer but contribute to a much larger degree. And this is an example of it mapped out from my own portfolio, showing financial contribution against time to secure. So volunteer work, for example, can be secured quickly but doesn't contribute much financially. And then as you move up to the upper right, the time to secure is much greater, the financial contribution is also much greater. And moving from the lower left, they tend to be more individual items, individually driven. But moving up to the right, what we see at that point is we're starting to bring in other people as part of it, partners involved in this or other individuals working as part of this practice. So this is something I'm going to suggest to think about in terms of balancing a portfolio in looking at a portfolio that's sustainable. The question might be, well, how do you implement it? Well, one way of approaching this is to first of all create a set of criteria that can be used to examine portfolio elements. And I talk about this in the book. They can include the financial aspect, which we talked about, but there can be other aspects that all contribute to an index of well-being, anticipated degree of fulfillment, alignment with values, fit with interests, financial contribution, low variability or seasonality, those things. And then creating those criteria then makes it possible to assess different components against them, and then over time assess their performance, and then adjust and refine over time. Things will change over time. New opportunities will surface. Other portfolio elements might have matured. And so ongoing adjustment is really important in this balancing process. All right, so our third strategic element is that of differentiation. Let me give you a vignette here. A number of years ago, I was delivering had delivered some work into an organization around exit interviews, workforce development, coaching, and so on. And they came to me and they said, look, we're thinking of putting out, we're going to be putting out an RFP, request for proposals, to deliver career services at different locations around the country into our organization. Would you be interested in responding to the RFP? And since this is an area that I did have some real background and interest in, I said certainly would be very interested. Now this is a very large organization. The career services would be delivered into a population of about 40,000 people. The organization is over 100,000 people. Huge organization, large resource base, could basically secure these services anywhere. Here we are, this very small entity, bidding for this RFP against what would have been very large multinational organizations offering services. And the question you'd ask is, well, how on earth could we as this small entity ever possibly secure this contract? Well, we did. We rewarded it. Now, obviously I'm a little biased here, but in fact it was a very smart decision because subsequent delivery bore out the merits of that decision. And the reason I'm telling this story is, the question is, why would they make that selection? And the answer is we were able to differentiate what we could do. We had specific content knowledge here. We knew the customer's organization very well. Now, that's not to say others couldn't have generated that knowledge. They could, but we had that piece as well. We were flexible. We actually tailored what we could offer specifically to their needs, as opposed to large organizations. It tends to be, you can have a black Ford or a black Ford. And also, because we didn't have this large corporate bureaucracy to contend with, we were very cost effective. And so those four different elements created something that was differentiated. So think about, for you and for your clients, what exactly might be those aspects of your work that excite you or your clients, and how might they be valuable to others, what that might mean to others. Now, there are many sources of differentiation that are possible. We go into them all in the book, and I don't have time to go through them all now, but this is an example of 10 different sources of differentiation. To sustain a non-traditional career and sustain differentiation, ideally establishing and integrating more than one source of differentiation provides a really good foundation. And then continuous development and innovation and measurement to inform and refine service delivery. And then finally, frequent value contribution. Now, the next strategic factor is pace of entry. And I remember years ago, before I actually went off completely on my own, and I was sort of thinking about heading down this path, somebody saying to me, the only way you can do this, the only way, is you have to jump into the deep end, stop everything else, and only do this non-traditional career. I've actually found that to be not the case at all. The gradual development has worked really well, gradually moving into this. So think about, again, either for yourself or for your clients, what might work well for them or for you. There are various factors that can affect that pace of entry. Personal preferences, sense of purpose, sense of urgency. What stage of development is somebody at, what kind of skill set is in place, and risk tolerance can affect it. Practical considerations, what kind of financial base is in place, infrastructure needs, and geographic aspects, what kind of relationships exist in the community. And support from others is important. Family and friends, customers, and the current employer. Current employer can either be an impediment or can be helpful. So just sort of recognizing a number of factors that can affect the pace of entry. And again, no right or no wrong answer. It's really very much something that we each individually can make a decision about. The next strategic factor is one of building needed skills. You know, I remember when I first started in working in the work world, in the research environment, here I was at sort of classical engineer in a sense. I absolutely hated public speaking. It was a tremendous anxiety around it. My boss said to me a couple of years into my first job, how about taking a public speaking course? And you know, I thought, okay, I'll do it. And I remember going into this hotel in Chicago. It was a rainy February morning with 20 other engineers, and all of us are going into this hotel room for this course in public speaking. Nobody wanted to be there. I think a root canal would have been infinitely preferable. And in we went, and that was actually a transformative experience. In 3 days, I came out actually having a sense that public speaking isn't something that only an anointed few can do, but it's possible for all of us to build those skills, including me. And it's turned out to be a very important skill over the years. That's an example of building a skill which didn't require a huge intervention. Different kinds of skills, foundational, content knowledge, business acumen, time management, interpersonal skills like marketing, communication, negotiating, networking, and then the customer-facing skills, marketing, consulting, sales, and then support service like information technology and human resources. And again, we talk in the book about how to access these skills, but it's important to recognize that skill breadth. And the characteristics that are important: integrity, matching voice and touch, honoring commitments, self-awareness. That provides a foundation for being comfortable staying with a path, holding to a purpose. Tenacity. Some things come quickly, other things will take, some of the projects we've secured may take a year or more. Empathy, that's being basically able to listen with your heart as well as your head. And then comfort with ambiguity. An example of that is those seemingly contradictory aspects of being able to work autonomously and collaboratively. The last strategic area is partnering. Various forms of partnering, informal. For example, 2 of the books that I've been involved in, I edited. I wrote a couple of chapters, other people wrote other chapters. It was a wonderful experience. That was informal partnering with the other chapter authors. Customer-facing partnering with other organizations that might be able to provide complementary capabilities. And then internal capabilities, things like accounting, payroll systems, and so on. Now the practical aspects, there's a whole component here, again, that we speak to in one of the book chapters that are important. Business structure, what form does that look like? In our case, we started with a sole proprietorship, and then moving forward from a sole proprietorship into what was an S-Corp. So we evolved from sole proprietorship to S-Corp. There are regulatory and related considerations. They'll be dependent on the local area, business registration, insurance, and so on. Internal infrastructure considerations, things like payroll, and payroll systems can be a wonderful virtual administrative assistant. Accounting systems like QuickBooks, tax return preparation, and such aspects. And then customer-facing, practical aspects like pricing, what does that look like, and outreach, such as website, social media, newsletter, and presentations. These are sort of the practical things that start to come into play here. So when we look then at the arc, the trajectory that the trajectory of this whole path, these are some of the stages that it goes through. There's the initial entry decision. That can include aspects such as what skills and attributes do I need? How does this match my work-life purpose? What career components might I introduce? And how can I differentiate them? What kind of relationship strength do I have in place? And how might I build that? The launch phase includes things like planning and strategy. Should I use some kind of formal planning process, which might be required if there's funding involved? Or can this be more informal, the whole planning activity, which is how I approached it. What about the structure? The business structure, should I link the career components together or not, and how do I balance them? And then customers, what kind of customer base will I be considering? Organizational, individual, how do I understand the needs of those customers? What does pricing look like, and so on? And then the infrastructure, location, is this something I can deliver from home? Do I need an office or some other kind of location if there's manufacturing involved? What sort of funding might be necessary? Now in the growth and evolution stage, now that can blend with the launch phase, but it means staying current with external factors and adjusting to evolving aspirations, new components, more complex business structure, partnering, and so on. And then assessing progress, both personal and business progress, tangible and intangible. And then completion, that last phase, which is, might this involve sale, transfer, or withdrawal? And what kind of time frame, gradual or abrupt? And what might now occur in terms of a transition to the next stage? So that's what the trajectory might look like. Now, some of the questions that I'm going to suggest it's really helpful to think about in this area. What benefits might a non-traditional career offer? What excites you in your work, and what might this mean for components in a non-traditional career? What strengths can you bring, and what gaps need to be filled? Whose support do you need? What strategic decisions do you need to make, and what steps will you take next? Some suggestions that I would have about this. Be clear about purpose. That's where that self-assessment piece is so important. Stay true to personal beliefs. There will be situations that will surface, that will come up, where it may be necessary to actually step back because for ethical reasons I've had to from business because of a demand from a customer that I felt was unethical, to actually step back from that and hold to personal beliefs. Expect unexpected supporters and barriers. Be patient in starting the components at the right time. About 3 or 4 years before I actually went fully on my own, I was thinking about starting down this path and looked at it and just didn't feel I had enough critical mass at that time. But then the time came later where I did feel there was critical mass. We started our first practice, and that was something which I was doing in conjunction with conventional work. Then the second practice was essentially jumping into this full time. Develop core skills before launch, if possible. Some may be developed afterwards, but some of them it can be really helpful to develop those skills. Various different interpersonal skills, negotiating skills, communication skills, and so on. To the extent they can be developed before launch, that can be really helpful. Nurture relationships. Relationships are the lifeblood of non-traditional careers. And build valued portable knowledge and skills. And it's very interesting in a conventional setting. In order to be effective in a conventional organization, large organization, it is necessary to build all kinds of networks and connections. Now, when there was longevity of employment, that was a good investment. But now with much more transitory relationships, that sense of connection or those connections within an organization are less valuable. In a non-traditional career, it's possible to develop and build portable knowledge, skills, and networks that move with you. And then enjoy the journey. There really is only one of them. Now, the resource that we have here is the book I mentioned, How to Build a Non-Traditional Career Path, Embracing Economic Disruption. It's available through all the usual, through the publisher, of course, and through the usual online sources, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and so on, and many others. But let me just say in summary here, a non-traditional career path offers an opportunity to integrate the emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and practical parts of who we are. It can be a journey with delightful surprises, with kindred fellow travelers that brings personal fulfillment and community benefit. And then we see individual initiative and community participation woven through our tapestry of life. And it's in finding such expression that the words of Irenaeus of Lyon from the 2nd century AD come to mind for me. Those words are, "The glory of God is the human person fully alive." And so at this point, I'd like to say thank you, wish everyone well, and open it up at this point to Heather to see if there are any thoughts, comments, observations, questions that might be surfacing. And thanks so much for joining us, by the way, to everyone.
Yes. Well, thank you, Ron. On behalf of those attending today and our entire membership across not just North America, but way beyond, thank you so much for the spirit, the elegance, the craft, and the just the wonderful support and thinking behind this presentation today. One thing that did strike me was the openness about sharing your own career path and experiences as just a superb way of illustrating your model and its applications. With regard to questions, I know I'm not alone in taking notes here today during your presentation, Ron, and I invite our participants to jot down some questions or actually to use the GoToWebinar control panel to type in some questions that you might have for Ron. Just while you're doing that, I have one that came up almost immediately as you were talking about this notion of locus of control. I think in our lives when we're somehow bookended by personal responsibilities, volunteer commitments, our careers, or what is left of our careers or career, we often feel adrift of that locus of control. In other words, we'd love to be able to have that gradual pace of entry into one or many choices, but that choice about how we compensate our work or get compensated for it outside of the traditional way, that choice is not made in the isolation of other selections, which are equally important. Can you comment, Ron, in either of the interviews or experiences that you've had with your clients about the emotional challenges that people are going through in making these decisions about their careers?
Yes, I mean, thanks so much for actually observing that, Heather. It's interesting, in assembling the book, I actually did email interviews with 7 people, and their vignettes are included here. It was so kind of them to share their experiences. Of those 7, most of them have backgrounds in the career area, and they would speak about in those vignettes how the aspects of what was important to them, creativity, variety, and so on, was so important to their emotional health, and how this, in a sense, sort of, how was important to their career path, which was connected to how they felt about their work and the emotional aspects. And so what we see is this particular path allows us to connect with the parts of who we are that have meaning. And it may not just be for us either. It's also for the people who are part of our lives, our family, those with whom we have professional relationships. Taking this path allows us to strengthen those relationships, and as we start to walk down this path, understand more about the expectations of other people and their hopes for themselves and for us, and to be able to, in a sense, flex and adjust or incorporate some of those wishes and those needs into the path that's unfolding here. And of course, there's the traditional Bill Bridges framework is also a good way of thinking about this, the change framework, because this whole step of moving from a conventional direction into a non-traditional path, that's very much in line with Bill Bridges' concept of an external event a change event, which then triggers internal emotions. And those internal emotions go through the stages of the sort of the ending stage, then that neutral zone, and then into this new beginning phase, the bridges stage of the transition stages. And to recognize that in engaging in this kind of process here, if we're stepping out of some, if there's some event that we decide that we want to initiate here that would take us down this path, that we're likely to experience those emotions. Now, if we take the more gradual approach, the more paced approach, those emotions are likely to be spread out over time. They'll be perhaps less intense. If we, on the other hand, decide to take an immediate step, then those emotions perhaps will be more intense. But just to recognize that the activities that we're talking about here are very much tied in with our concept, our self-identity, our concept of who we are, and the relationship that we have with those around us and the community that we're a part of.
Thank you. It is complex as well as equally fascinating. We do have our first question, and this is regarding older workers. A non-traditional career may feel like their only choice. Would your book be helpful for helping clients consider how they may see this as a great possibility?
Well, thanks for asking the question. I think you know the answer to the second part of that question, but thanks for asking it. I do think it would be tremendously helpful. I mean, just to give you actually I'm speaking with a group next week, an Experience Unlimited group locally about this subject. Yes, I think this offers tremendous opportunity, this approach, and we're seeing it's interesting, the entrepreneurial activity that's going on, much of it, in fact, is within the demographic of folks who are at later stages of their careers. And I very much advocate for this approach. I mean, in my own case, I was in my, let's see, in my mid-50s when I actually took the full-scale step to go off entirely on my own. I was in my mid-40s when I took the first step. And it's been tremendously fulfilling. It's interesting, the quote that I think I read to you as we were going through this from somebody who said, I wish I'd done this 10 years earlier. I have a sense that's probably the reaction that many people will have at those later career stages. Boy, I wish I'd done this sooner, but it's never too late, as we saw on that slide. And I do think that, of course, the benefit of approaching this at a later career stage is there is a tremendous wellspring of knowledge and experience on which to build a non-traditional career path. At a young age, the benefit is, in a sense, that enthusiasm to engage in new directions and start those. In fact, I'm coaching somebody right now who's at that point. But at the later stage, there's this tremendous foundation of knowledge and experience that can be a strong basis for a non-traditional career path.
Thank you. We've got another question related to your content, in particular around the alignment of readiness to work in a variety of capacities in this new career path, with the marrying up with opportunities to actually do it and get compensated for it. I think people have a desire and a vocation to engage in a variety of things, but the necessity is, how quickly can I match that with an opportunity that is fairly compensated? So you referenced a number of illustrations, including some from Australia. What is your sense, Ron, about that cycle time for those who are, well along the path to non-traditional careers? Is it a straight line, that connection between your readiness to engage with it and somebody willing to pay you for it? Are you seeing more of that as a recognition here in North America, or what are you seeing in developing markets like we are more informed now about, like in China and India?
Well, yes, I mean, it's quite remarkable what's occurring in China, isn't it? The tremendous growth in the business community there. I think your question, I believe, Heather, was to what do the time dynamics of engaging in this path look like? Is that sort of what you were probing around?
Yes, and the readiness of a market to engage people. You know, this industry has had a kind of a notorious start in the outplacement world, where you were disengaged, not of your own making, from a traditional career or a traditional employer. Now we have the flip side of more people, as a function of demographics, doing consulting work or working on their own for a variety of reasons. And we know there's work that needs doing out there. It's just that how long can we expect there to be uptake from buyers of services for people who are engaging in these non-traditional work processes?
Yes, well, so first of all, I mean, I do think you bring up the interesting example of outplacement there, Heather. Outplacement, and I worked in that area myself for several years, it's an event-driven sector. Events happen, and there's a response to the events. So you're right, it's very much a sort of firefighting kind of activity. In my own non-traditional career path, I have not focused on event-driven situations, but more on ongoing needs like career development, leadership development, change management, assessment processes. Now, the time dynamics, I would suggest that the way to build it under the time, first of all, the time dynamics are very dependent on the specific situation, the individual, the potential customer. But here's a case of where building relationships is so important, because by building a relationship with potential customers, it's possible then to get a really good sense of what those time dynamics look like and what that means, and then blend together some opportunities which may be secured relatively quickly, but again maybe smaller in scale, with others that may take longer to secure but are more sustainable over time and larger in scale. So that's why actually I would suggest that thinking about this as a portfolio with each component contributing in a specific way to the sort of the time financial contribution profile, so that altogether the combinations actually work well, rather than feeling that there is only one single component and that the time associated with that has to drive the whole non-traditional career. Does that make sense?
Yes, it is a complex scenario for sure, and it has implications, obviously cultural implications as well as skills and a number of other areas. So, well responded. Our next question is around the younger worker. So we've talked about those who are at the other end of the spectrum, but for younger workers, are new college university grads ready for this type of model? And should we, as career counselors, educators at the post-secondary level, be offering this teaching to those younger individuals?
Yes, so let me just give you a couple of specific examples, because I think very much so. I think it's so important to equip the generation entering the workforce with the knowledge and understanding that they in fact can take control in the way that we're talking about here. And I think there's a real openness in the millennial generation. So a couple of examples. I gave a talk about 3 or 4 months ago, actually to a group of chemical engineering students on the west coast of the US here on this subject, and there was a lot of interest around that. And only this week I gave a talk to MBA students, actually at UC Berkeley at the House School, and again significant interest, and people afterwards coming up and said, somebody came up and I'll be working with who actually said, you know, I'm just starting down this path. I've pulled out of the traditional consulting arena, and I'm very interested in moving off on my own in this direction. So there's a receptivity, and these are 2 examples, one on the engineering side, one on the business side, a receptivity I think to this generation, to this kind of approach. I think it's awfully important that we provide this as an option, not suggesting that it's the only approach or necessarily the right approach for everyone, but simply this is a really good option, and some people will be very much drawn to it.
Thank you. For sure, it calls into question the how we need as career professionals to equip ourselves going forward if, in the main, clients who come to us for advice and for navigating their career path or paths, need to have quick engagement for a variety of reasons. In your research for this book, as well as sort of the culmination of a lot of research you've done leading to this point, and this, I think it's a pivot point in career development work, what would you say are the top 3 competencies that career professionals will need going forward to be effective for their clients?
Now that's an interesting question, isn't it? I'm not sure that I would say pick out 3 necessarily. I suggest that there are, I mean, you can almost think about those competencies in different groupings. There are interpersonal competencies, how to interface effectively with people, how to be able to open a conversation, build trust, to be able to listen effectively. So a whole series of interpersonal competencies, which include communication, the ability to communicate well. Then there are other competencies that surround perhaps more the discipline of the profession with respect to changing workforce characteristics. And so having an understanding and knowledge of the evolution of what work looks like and what that means and the alternatives and options for people, I think is very important to stay current with that. And then there are some sort of practical competencies about the ability to utilize some of the wonderful tools that are available to us to help illuminate for people their own skills, their own understanding, some of the assessment tools and so on, to help illuminate that. For example, I mean, just to give you an example about the conversation we had around differentiation. It's very interesting. You probably experience the same thing. Often when working with individual clients, or sometimes, a client will have a wonderful skill set but will not recognize it or be aware of it. And the process of enabling that person to understand the skills they have, the tremendous strengths they have, and to bring that to the surface for them, and sort of understand, in a sense, the personal differentiation. That's a really important skill set as well for the counselor, to be able to facilitate that, to allow that to take shape for the career development person. And then there are actually some organizationally oriented skills. I've been talking somewhat so far about the interface with individuals. There's a whole other component, which is the ability to work effectively in an organizational setting and understand the dynamics of the internals of an organization, the social structure, the political structure, and what that means. So that's a very important skill set, both in terms of our ability to work effectively in consulting into organizations, but also in terms of our being able to help equip our clients with those same skill sets. So I'm sorry, I didn't quite answer the way I think you asked the question, Heather, but hopefully that was helpful.
Well, very much helpful, and actually I'm delighted to say that Ron has agreed to participate in a panel discussion at our conference on this very topic, which is really around how do we equip ourselves as career professionals going forward with these new opportunities to support our clients, those essential tools and competencies for success. So there's no clear one answer. It is it's going to be a kaleidoscope of competency, skills, attitudes, and we very much look forward to you elaborating it with your panelist colleagues at our conference in November. One final question that we have before we wrap up for today. We appreciate your flexibility as well as others on the presentation today, because we're exceeding our time, but I think we'll all agree it's been well worth the with the extra time. The notion of vocation, I think, is very important, and a question here is really around how we're able to support individuals as they seek out either a revised vocation for celebrating the work that they would like to do, as well as what is most practical from an economic opportunity. So question would be, how do we, again, as career professionals, support someone who's trying to find a path to that true vocation? You've very elegantly described your own career path through the model. And I have to say, it took me back to about 5 years ago when I visited the New England network, and there was a facilitated discussion on this in which we paired with each other and described, these are career professionals, about 30 of us in the room, and described the path to which we became who we were in this career work. And it was absolutely fascinating. There was immediately an intimacy with each other about why we were doing this work and why it was meaningful. And so I'm just wondering how we may be able to revive that notion of vocation in our own careers, as well as to really advance this in the minds of our clients. So what is your sense about vocation and how to bring that alive for people?
Yes, I think that it's an awfully important area. There's a career counselor who's no longer with us, unfortunately, but she gave a wonderful presentation. It's about, I heard this 1996, about 18 years ago, and I've quoted this actually in a couple of the books I've written, where she frames our relationship with work on different levels. And the 4 levels are: job as the initial level, where essentially we just pay for doing, we do something and get paid for it. And occupation is that next level, which is really all about, it's still about doing. There's a little bit more sense of who we are. Career is the 3rd level. And career there's continuity involved, but it's externally validated. And then vocation is that 4th level. That's calling in the sense of a greater good. It was a really good framing. I so like the way she framed this. And it's been interesting over the years. I've asked people in groups on occasions where they are currently and where they would like to be. And it's not surprising, invariably, people would like to move typically more towards vocation, not always necessarily to that step. And by the way, this is not like Maslow, where the implication is you have to proceed through one step before reaching the next one. But simply it's a selection. And it's quite appropriate at different stages in our lives, in fact, to elect to engage in different ways with work. But generally speaking, there's a general sort of tendency more to that sense of vocation. And what I personally believe is really important is, and when I work with clients individually, I'll usually go through that and ask them where they've been in their previous employment situation or work situations and where they would like to go in the future. I think it's so important for us to help clients understand the implications of their trajectory and the implications of what their desires are in the future. And to the extent that we can, where their wish is to move more towards vocation, to the extent that we can help facilitate that, I think that's a tremendous contribution, both individually and in a community sense. And I do feel that this non-traditional career path, in fact, is one window that can help move in that direction because it's so aligned with who we are individually.
Well, thank you, Ron. That brings to a formal conclusion your presentation today. We've been speaking with Dr. Ron Elsdon, who has shared with us his perspective on how to build a non-traditional career path, embracing economic disruption, based on his book, which has just been released. It is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble online, other online venues, and of course will be available at our conference here in Toronto in November. As mentioned, if you enjoyed Ron's presentation today, we're delighted that he'll be participating with us at the conference on one of many panel discussions that we'll be having around career, what next careers look like for us in this profession, what a career is, and how we reframe our focus on the value of our contribution to this profession and to a variety of sectors. Our next Salon webinar in this series, again another benefit of membership in ACP International, will be on Thursday, October the 9th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and it will be featuring Dr. Annabelle Reitman and Dr. Sylvia Benetti. Annabelle Reitman, who many of you know, is a longtime member of ACP International and a contributor to our Washington network. She and Sylvia have written yet another book, which is wonderful, again based on intergenerational mentoring in the workplace and the role that career professionals have in this. So they'll be giving just a piece of the overall workshop that they'll be sharing at our conference in November. And again, that is on Thursday, October the 9th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Annabelle Reitman and Sylvia Benetti. One more piece of information with regard to today's presentation. I'm assuming, Ron, that your slides will be available to our members in the Member Resources section as well as the audio file following this presentation today. So we thank you for that contribution to the wealth of our resources that we offer our members. Later this week, we're very excited to announce a reformatted and a re-enhanced version of our conference agenda and program. It will be 2 full days of Friday, November the 7th, and Saturday, November the 8th. Welcome reception on November the 6th, the Thursday evening. We'll be announcing a 1-day rate for those who are available to come on one of the days only, but you're, of course, welcome to participate in both. And Friday evening, we'll be having our celebratory dinner and banquet with awards and some very special guests that I'm sure that you'll be delighted to hear from. And as Ron said, relationships are absolutely key. And when you marry that with professional development, it is a fabulous opportunity for us in our profession, as well as those who are interested and have a stake in the game and talent, to be present and joining us. So again, on behalf of ACP International, Dr. Ron Elsdon, and all of you who are participating here today, thank you so much for your engagement, your attention. We look forward to seeing you live in person at our conference in November, and preceding that online and engage with our next Salon webinar on October the 9th. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks so much, Heather, and thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.